Good morning, my name is Kelly McKeon, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Miguel Ayala. Today is November 18th, 2013, and I'm conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation's James W. Cooper Fellows' History of Legal Services in Connecticut project. So Miguel, do you want to just start off and tell us when and how you got started working for legal aid in Connecticut?
Sure. Yes, I started October 7, 1971. I've been around 42 years. It's been a long career. It's been
a lot of experience.
A lot of experience. When I started in legal services, back then you had the community-based legal services. There were offices right in the communities. And it was great because you were part of that community. There was this connection to the people that we represented. It was pretty much them walking into the doors whenever they had a legal issue that they confronted. So we were able to have that connection, and I think is something that was part of the mission of legal services. That's why many of the offices were based in the community. It was a great experience.
And what office did you start off in?
I started out in Bridgeport,
okay.
1971. And it was great about it was that I lived in Bridgeport,
okay.
and I could actually walk out the door and walk around the corner, and our office was right there, which was on East Main Street in Bridgeport.
Okay.
Grew up in Bridgeport, knew the community, and so that I interacted with these people because there were people that oftentimes I would come in contact with because I lived right there in Bridgeport. So it was a great experience.
So was your office very centrally located in Bridgeport, downtown, right in the neighborhood?
It was. Well, interesting enough, at one point when I started there, we had two offices. We had one which is called the East. It was the east side of Bridgeport, and that's where I lived and I grew up. And then the main office was on Main Street in Bridgeport. So yes, we had two offices at that time.
Okay.
I worked in the east side office.
Okay.
On East Main Street.
And how did you get clients? Was it hard to get clients, or would they just walk in?
No, exactly. It was not hard because what happened back then was because we were located right there in the community. We also were in contact with other agencies that were also part of the community. So they knew us, we knew them, and pretty much they would refer cases, or like I said earlier, these were people that would actually walk into. At that point, I recall that there was no appointments. People just walked in with their problems.
And what types of cases were you seeing in the beginning, and did those cases change over time? Was it more of a mixture later, or talk a little bit about the work that you've done?
Sure. Probably the most of the folks that came in were people that were having housing problems. That was probably one of our largest areas. I would say housing, family, and then benefits area was also pretty big. That was people that were applying for benefits and were denied.
Right.
For example, back then there was a program that was called AFDC, and that was the program that would give financial assistance to people that were applying for a cash assistance program. We would also do Social Security disability work. But I would say that the largest area of service, I would probably still say there was probably housing, and then second I would say family, and probably third would be like the benefits area.
Okay. And do you want to just talk a little bit about any memorable clients or any memorable cases or any memorable stories that you can tell us about your work in legal aid?
Yeah, wow, there were probably many, but I think that back when I started, of course, one of the nicest things that we were able to do back then was community organizing. And I recall that at that time there were many issues with landlords. and people oftentimes didn't really have a say, and oftentimes they were illegally evicted and no way or nowhere to turn to. We did a lot of organizing around the issue of housing with landlords, and so that
What do you mean by organizing? What did you actually do?
we would actually organize. There were actually committees,
Okay.
and we would meet. Oftentimes, we would sometimes meet at night, and there were people that. These were people that were tenants. There were also tenants organizations that were organized back then.
And so was this a way to explain to these people what their rights were?
Exactly. And anyway, the nice thing that happened with that is that when an issue evolved, we could just reach out to the community because we had that connection, with these tenants groups, and that was a great way to create a feeling that they felt that they were being heard,
Mm-hmm.
and that and represented. So it was a real challenge because that was very new to legal services way back. I'm talking in the early 70s.
Right. And so these meetings, were you running these meetings, or did you run them and then sort of hand them off to people in the community to run?
Yeah, it was basically there was some organizations that kind of were in place, like Acorn was organization that did a lot of organizing around those issues, and especially, and then there was also the issue of where benefits became a big issue back then, also defending the rights of people. So that became another area. But we were lucky in that we were able to go into the community, set up these meetings, organize some of these organizations, and then a lot of times they would then become their own entity,
Right.
which was also good.
Right. And were the meetings usually landlord-tenant stuff, or were they also
A lot of it,
benefits?
yeah,
And
yeah. It was both, but I think the largest service area or population was around housing, landlord, tenant
Right.
issues. It was a big area back then.
Right. And so what were some of the bigger cases, the more memorable cases, individual cases that you worked on
Well,
that really had an impact
Yeah.
on you?
I think back then, like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of individual cases, because what was happening back then was that people were, like I mentioned earlier, people were coming in through the doors. I remember one time a memorable case that we had. We represented a number of tenants, and what was happening was there was one particular landlord in that area, at that time, who was very controlling, very abusive, and to the point where
Sort of known in the community for that type of...
yes, he was. And what was happening was that he was controlling these tenants to the point where they had to actually give him their check monthly. He would take their rent, right, and then give them the balance, and it was that controlling thing. He was also a very intimidating person. He had a lot of power in the city, and so I recalled one incident where we had a demonstration around his building, and he actually pulled out a shotgun on one of the police officers in Bridgeport. It got that tense. And I think what came out of that was the understanding that he understood that people were organizing, and that at that point we were able to kind of defeat that practice and explain to the people, you do not have to turn over your check to this landlord. and have him have so much control of your life. I think that was one of the probably biggest, and I don't believe that became a case that was litigated, but it was a case where
People are taking action.
yes, and we were part of that. It was a good feeling, and I think they had the trust, and they knew that if it became a lawsuit, that they would be a part, and they were being heard, and they were going to be represented. I think that was probably one of my all time best experience in with that area, because again, like I mentioned earlier, many of these people felt they had very little rights. And there was probably at least 2 or 3 of these landlords, because what happened, what they would do, they would own these multiple units. Sometimes, I'm going to say that they may have been sometimes up to like 20 tenants.
Wow.
There were huge tenant buildings. Many of them had many violations.
Safety
Violations, yes, they were. So, I would say this was probably one of our great victories, I would say, for the people in Bridgeport back then.
Right. And are there any other memorable cases? Maybe ones that were actually litigated and that you.
Well, we were part of the way back. Cases that were brought against the state of Connecticut with the compliant, the due process part of it, where, for example, under some of these programs, if the state is going to do an adverse action on someone, for example, if they were going to discontinue their benefits, they have to notify the person. And so there was this big case, and I forget the exact name of the case. I don't know if I can't think of the case from it, but that was a very significant case, because what it did, it afforded people that right, that if they were going to have an adverse action taken against them, that the state had to notify them and give them due notice, explaining the reason and also explaining what their appeal rights were. So that was a real big case that was brought. We had, keep in mind that at one time, Connecticut Legal Services, the program I worked for, we had 13 field offices that covered, because what happens, the dynamic of legal services, that you had regional coverage. For example, Connecticut Legal Services, the program I worked for, there were 13 offices, so you had like an area like, for example, Bridgeport would cover like Fairfield County. We had a Norwalk office at one time that would cover that area, a Stamford office. There was a Danbury office, there was a Waterbury office. Then the northern part was a Rockville office, there was the New Britain office, Meriden office. Today, sad to say that there are only, I believe, six field offices. And it's sad because the number of poor people in Connecticut are probably the same, or even if it's even probably grown, because one of the things that happened is when we had the financial meltdown in '08, many of those people that lost their jobs, these are people that had very good jobs, lost their homes, lost their jobs. They are now today some of our clients. They meet our eligibility guideline because we're a federally funded agency. So it's created another tier of people that are eligible for our services, yet our funding has been reduced to the point where many offices have had to shut down, and or we've lost significant amount of staffing, and this goes across the board. Many offices have had to lay off, or people have been put on furlough. So it's a challenge, it really is, and it becomes more of a challenge now when we're still facing more cutbacks probably.
So do you want to just take a step back, and how did the structure of legal aid in Connecticut shrink from 13 offices down to, I think you said now that there's 6 offices? When did that happen? Did it happen over time? What types of
Yeah.
decisions were made, and who made those decisions
Well, we had-
to shrink
yeah.
the size of it?
We've had, when I was working in Bridgeport, 1995, there was, I almost want to call it a meltdown, because what happened there was that's when we had a staff, Connecticut Legal Services, I think it was like about 160, which was reduced to 80, a staff of about
Wow.
80. We also faced, in addition to reduction in funding, we also faced restrictions. So they put more restrictions on us, the type of services that we were providing. And then what happened, that's when Norm James decided to create statewide legal service, which
Right.
is the legal hotline. We took on the federal grant monies so that he felt we could probably live with those restrictions. The other legal services program chose not to take the money so that they didn't have to deal with those restrictions, because
And what type of restrictions are you talking about?
cases,
Okay.
certain types of cases, like for example, we are not allowed to take any like immigration type of stuff.
Okay.
That's just something.
So if you take the federal grant money, you're subject to those restrictions.
Exactly. Legal service never did. Well, this is probably a little different, but we've never done criminal cases. That we've never done those. New Haven Legal Assistant through a grant does do some criminal, but we've mostly done, civil type of work, defense type work, if you will, in housing, family, probably, and then the benefits area. Our program, statewide legal service we have we do a consumer small part of that. But I think the programs, what we call direct service programs,
Mm-hmm.
there's a challenge for them there, because they've lost a lot of funding, they've lost a lot of staff. If I go back to 1971, we took another hit way back when Ronald Reagan was president. That was I believe that was in the 80s. We took another hit there. We lost funding there. So I think it's been a struggle, even way back. But certainly the Ronald Reagan era, and then onward, we probably kept level funding maybe for certain years, But in 95, we took a big hit. And then in today's era now, like I mentioned to you, the challenges when we have this tier of people that are coming for our services, we're not able to meet that demand. There's just no possible way. I don't know, and with the sequester, we also got hit with that 10% funding. That's going to be a challenge, because that's like a 10-year phase. So we in legal service figured that for the next 10 years, we're going to have some real challenges. Foundations where we could potentially go for funding, I mean, they're pretty much, the demand on them is great. They've lost a lot of monies, because many of these foundations, they would rely on their monies through investments, and that's taken a hit too.
So do you feel like after the Reagan era, and then I think you said 95, there was another big cut in funding, have you felt like legal aid in Connecticut has never been able to reach that high level that you were at before those cuts in funding, in terms of the number of cases you were taking and the resources that you had?
Yeah, well, no, we never. I mean, I think the numbers, like I mentioned earlier, people were actually encouraged, if you will, to walk into the office, and there was no such thing as appointments. Now, there's that part. there's the part where they have to limit the services. I'll give you an example. Some of the offices have had to, in many cases, eliminate certain services. So what we do, Statewide Legal Services, we do the case assessment for the other programs. So we refer cases to them.
Right.
We're limited. We stay with us in terms of the type of case that we're able to refer. And I think that's evident of, again, lack of resources.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So who are some of your mentors in the beginning and over time, and how did they shape the type of work that you've done?
Well, I like I said, I've been around like 42 years. I think that it was interesting, and the answer that I would give is that I was probably more inspired, and probably mentors, surprisingly enough, were people in the community, people that were out there every day, meeting these challenges, oftentimes being ridiculed. 60s and 70s were all these folks were organizing. They were considered many times militants, communists, and these people were brave people. Like one of the most influential person in my life, I think, is someone. His name was Uli Batalla, and then his brother Cesar Batalla. More Cesar Batalla, because Cesar was an organizer, and he did so much for the community in Bridgeport. Many of the issues he would address, Cesar had kind of like carte blanche walking into our office in Bridgeport, but he earned that respect,
Right.
In legal services, I remember Whitney Lewandin. He worked with us for a number of years. Someone who is still a good friend of mine. Worked with us in legal services. I lost one of my dear, and he was a mentor to me for many years. His name was Dick McCarthy. Just a great human being, great lawyer. And what it was these individuals were, they were lawyers, but they were just good people, and that had this vision to help people. There's only a certain percentage of people lawyering that could do this type of work.
Right.
It's difficult. You give up a lot. Many times people will say why you do it, and there has to be a passion why people do this. You sacrifice your pay, on legal services programs historically. They just haven't been able to pay. They're not able to pay, but you understand that. And there are people that are still around. Norm James, for example, he was around for about 40 years. And he's someone who he worked, and I say worked, he was, most of his work he did it on the northern part of Connecticut. And he was my director for a number of years, someone I highly respect. There's probably a number of people, but again, I think that the vision, I remember really what's kept me on for so long is probably the community, the need, and one of the things that we lack now and again because of our resources is the lack of community outreach. There's not that much of that going on, and for the obvious, there's just the personnel's not there. There's just not that many people. There's not that much organizing going in many of these communities. This was something new way back in the 60s and 70s, but so much was done back then. There were some great victories, but who created this were people that had this vision, working with people the less fortunate, and so that it's been a great experience for me.
Right, and you clearly have that passion. You've been here for 40 years. What how did you get that initial job doing this? Was it something that you sought out? Was it someone in the community that said, hey, you should look into this?
Yeah, it was interesting. Yes, I started out when I went to University of Bridgeport and majored in physical education. I wanted to be a physical education teacher, and they had one of the great programs in the Northeast way back, University of Bridgeport. But when I got out, there was some community organizations that was evolving back then, and I started working for this organization called ABCD. It was a community-based, they were getting grants, and they had this program. It was called New Careers, and what they would do is they would pair individuals with different organizations. I could have gone with, and a few of my friends did. For example, Department of Correction, parole, and they were all good jobs. Federal, and there was some federal jobs, there was some state jobs. But I spoke to someone and they said, there's not that many people in your community, and I was probably the first Latino that worked in the Bridgeport office. And then with the part that they said, this would allow you to have that connection. The fact that the office was right there,
Right.
on East Main Street, and like I mentioned earlier, I lived around the block.
Yeah.
So that was my first start. It was called New Careers, and it was a great program. What they did was they paired you with an agency, and what they would do is they would subsidize the pay for like a year, and then at the end of the year, you would be evaluated, and if things worked out, and so then I was hired by Jim Trowbridge, who I believe was also, and it was a part of that interview that we had last time.
Yep.
You were there, and he was involved for many years with University of Bridgeport and Quinnipiac University Law School. So it's been many years.
And so why have you stayed and continued to do this work for as long as you have?
Just the passion of knowing that sometimes at the end of the day, as difficult as it is, because it's a challenge, many times there are disappointments too, because sometimes you're not able to help that individual. But when you're in a position where at the end of the day you felt that you made a difference of this person's life, many times I've to this day I get calls from, oh, Mr. Ayala, yeah, you represented my grandmother, so
Wow.
Think about it. And you remember those stories because sometimes they share those stories, with you. And sometimes it's beyond the legal problem that they have. You're also able to talk to people about making good decisions, and I still do that. Oftentimes I get to chit chat with some of these people, and you're kind of educating them too.
So giving more than just legal advice, giving them
You are.
advice about life.
About life, because see, I grew up in the projects. I understand how difficult their lives are because I went through that. I understand poverty. I was a part of that. I understand the struggles of violence and what goes on in these communities. I lived through that.
Right.
But I'm also able to tell them how you can get through that, how you could become, a viable person in your community, and you can move on with a career. Education is a big part of that. I still mentor kids down in Bridgeport. I'm involved in this organization. It's called Bridgeport Caribe Youth Leaders, and what we do is we come in contact with many of these families. Right now we have over 500 families in Bridgeport. And it gives me the opportunity to go back to Bridgeport and still talk to some of these people, some of these families. Oh yeah, my mom remembers you, and it's such a nice connection to that. So the vision is still there. I see where there's just so much to be done. Where I struggle with is the fact that we're not able to reach out to the masses of people that really need our services. It's just so difficult for them to even contact us. We have the legal hotline program. Oftentimes people are telling us they have to wait sometimes a week or longer to reach us. So that's a challenge. And I think that
Do you think there's any way to get over that challenge? Or do you think the only way to get over that would be if you received more funding, more resources?
Yeah, it's really about that. It's
okay.
really about, because we would need to hire more people. I mean, think about it. I mentioned earlier, if you look at Connecticut Legal Services, they've never been able to sustain or to even come close to 13 field offices down to 6.
Right.
And from a staff of, I believe, like 160 to probably 80, that's half. They lost half of their staffing.
Were the number of cases also decreased?
Definitely.
Tremendously, I'm sure.
Yeah, because the numbers are just not there.
Right.
Like I mentioned earlier, you take a program like even New Haven Legal Assistance, they've had to reduce their staff. Greater Hartford Legal Service have had to do their. See, some of these other programs, you have like Greater Hartford, they've been able to do a little better because they have the Greater, I forgot what it's called, so foundation, the Hartford area foundation, something like that. New Haven also, interestingly, the backbone of New Haven Legal Service is Yale,
Right.
and that's been important to them also, that they have, there's probably more resources than probably the New Haven program area. Connecticut Legal Services spread out, so that's the other thing. See, New Haven has one program and they do a regional coverage. Great Hartford Legal Services has one, but CLS covers a larger area with probably 6 field offices. So, it's a big gap there. But to answer your question, I think it's really about resources. I just don't think that it's going to happen anytime soon. I hate to say that, but I don't see it happening.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the reaction of the private bar to the beginning of legal aid in Connecticut. What was it? A good reaction? Was it a hostile reaction? Do you think do you think it's changed over time? How do people view legal aid in Connecticut today? People in the legal community, people in the judicial community, judges. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences with that?
Sure, yeah. I think that way back, and I think many of the people that you will interview probably feel the same way. I think there was way back, there was some hostility, there was the feeling of, kind of like, this is my turf, you're coming into my territory. Maybe they felt that we would be taking cases and this kind of a thing. So we had that. And
do you think they were worried that you weren't going to do a good job?
That too. I think that probably there was some combination of that. But in reality, I think the message was, know that this is not our purpose. And in reality, many of the cases that we were taking, for example, was evictions, defense eviction. Well, first of all, it's not the type of cases that they would have been able to take or would have taken because our clients could not afford to pay them,
Right.
So it wasn't even about that.
So you were tapping into a new market, really.
It was really, people that were not served, never mind underserved, they were not being served at all, I think through the years, there's been changes, acceptance, understanding that our work is important. I think you even have law firms that become actually members of our board, different boards of legal services. We have the pro bono programs, that these are private attorneys that donate their time. That's become huge in the last maybe 10 years or probably a little longer. So there is that. I think there's the element of respect is, I think, yes. And then with judicial also, recently something happened. The governor, Malloy, had an actually, he kind of addressed and the acknowledgement of the importance of legal services at the legislative body. That was really huge. That I don't recall any governor ever doing that. We've gotten even some monies. Connecticut Legal Service has gotten some, state monies to fund programs. So I think that it's come a long ways. But I think there is that now. I don't think that there's that feeling that, that they don't want us.
Right, so it's considered more mainstream.
I think it's mainstream. And I think I think they understand that our work is very important. It's respected. But our work has evolved. We've branched out in all different areas. There's also many my colleagues that from legal service that become judges.
Right.
That was way back then. That was not heard of. They said not possible. What has been possible?
I just interviewed Judge Gill.
Absolutely.
Days ago.
Absolutely. And people that been around for a while, that highly respected. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I'm glad. I probably will be around maybe about another year, maybe another year and a half, because I've been around a long time,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what I will take with me is that a lot of these experiences and connections, I'm going to go back. My vision is to go back to Bridgeport when I retire and continue to do some of the outreach, connect with the communities, because I see
Something
it.
that you miss.
I really miss it. I tell you, it's been a challenge for me with statewide legal services, because I like to connect with the community, with people. I like direct representation. I miss that. With statewide legal services, it's pretty much a legal hotline. So I miss that. I may even volunteer down at the Bridgeport office. I've spoken to the managing attorney that was a good friend of mine for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would probably consider doing that. But I think I want to go out and do some community outreach, connect back with the community, because I really miss that.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview.
It's been a
a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.